Hello, this is Lord's Legion and welcome to a brand new countdown. And I know it has been a while since I last looked at any piece of concept art, but at this point this is about time that I go back to what many people are looking forward to the most in terms of my videos. And since this film series dominated the last poll, in this video we're going to be focusing on the top 15 interesting Transformers concept art. I was hoping for this to be a top 20, but I couldn't find enough interesting piece of concept art that I considered to be mind-blowing. And like in every single concept art countdown videos, I tend to have a poll on which you guys can vote on which film series I should focus on next. And whichever gets the most votes will be the next video that I'm going to be focusing on. So without further ado, let's begin with this countdown. So kicking off the list at number 15, we have Optimus on the Run from Age of Extinction. Now this takes place somewhere near the first act, in which Optimus Prime is heavily wounded after being on the run for several years. And what I really like about this design is just how wounded Optimus really is and how his armour seems to be falling from his body. His traditional colours are almost non-existent, he's covered in dirt, and above all else you could even see him leaking from his stomach. And looking at this image right there, you can somewhat feel Optimus's pain, because of how vulnerable he really appears in this piece of concept art. So for number 14 we have World War II Bumblebee from The Last Night. Now we did get to see Bumblebee in this previous form in some of the flashbacks, although we only really had a few glimpses here and there. But in this piece of concept art, we get to see the entire thing for ourselves. And what's really interesting is the fact that this version of Bumblebee does have more of the body shape of his G1 era, most specifically when it comes down to his limbs. Because when you look at Bumblebee's legs in this form, he does have this really wide and bulky limbs. And you can also tell that just because this version of Bumblebee appeared in World War II, you can see that some of his weaponry are also pretty primitive. Because not only does he have some rocket launchers as well as what appears to be some shotguns, he is also carrying a giant hammer. And I will admit that this is a pretty interesting take on Bumblebee's design. Coming in at number 13, we have Scarred Lockdown from Age of Extinction. Now as much as I don't really like Age of Extinction, one of the only saving graces in this film is of course Lockdown, because of how unique of a villain he is in comparison to most main antagonists. Because he's nothing more but a bounty hunter who isn't even associated with the Autobots or the Decepticons. Although one thing that I wasn't particularly fond of in terms of Lockdown's final design is of course his face, because it just looked uninspired. Well, this face looks a lot more menacing in my eyes because he has that scar, in which not only does it showcase the fact that he is a legitimate bounty hunter, but it also showcases his alignment with the Makers, in which is somewhat reminiscent to how Optimus and Megatron had them similar marks in The Last Night. And if they were to choose that design for Lockdown instead, then I believe Lockdown could have stood out above the rest. Coming in at number 12 we have Power Up Optimus from Revenge of the Fallen. Now clearly this is the same form Optimus takes during the climax as he is up to face the Fallen and Megatron. And even though this design is completely overdone, at the same time it is somewhat fascinating. Because he is loaded with turrets, he is loaded with guns, and clearly this version of Optimus is a lot more of a behemoth. But when you look at the image itself, you can see that it has next to nothing resembling Jetfire's body parts. So does that mean that this could have been from Optimus's arsenal from his lorry? Whatever the case it could have been, I am somewhat glad that we didn't get to see this final design because it just looks uncomfortable. So for number 11 we have this version of Devastator, also from Revenge of the Fallen. And just as you thought that the final design for Devastator was completely tacky, this is on a whole other level. Because with this monstrosity, you really can't describe what it's supposed to be. Like, I suppose that this was going to be more of a beast that has all four legs, while it still has that giant mouth that devours anything in its path. But again, it's really hard to describe this thing because even I can't tell what this is supposed to be. Because to me this more resembles like a bunch of scrapped pieces of Decepticons than Devastator itself. Coming in at number 10 we have Broken Megatron from Dark of the Moon. Now some people don't like this portrayal of Megatron because of how broken down he really was in that film, but to me I just really enjoyed seeing that new portrayal of Megatron because of how desperate he really is to survive. And this concept art right here does perfectly capture Megatron's essence. Yes, he is trying to put on this tyrant facade, but really he is too weakened. And through most of the film, Megatron had to be on the sidelines because of how vulnerable he really was. And seeing this new side to Megatron just felt refreshing to me, and I feel like this piece of concept art does perfectly capture this. Coming in at number 9, we have Energized Optimus Prime from Age of Extinction. Now on the surface, this doesn't appear to be anything too special, as this is more or less Optimus's final design from this film. But what really interests me at least are of course his weaponry, most specifically more of his energized shield and his sword. Because with the exception of Optimus's energized axes and stuff, we really didn't get to see too much energy related weaponry in the series thus far. And this is still something that we have yet to see in the series. And so to me it is pretty interesting that at one point they were going to introduce more energy based weaponry for the series. Because when you think of most other iterations of Transformers out there, a lot of times you do get to see Transformers shooting lasers, and yet with the film series it appears to be non-existent. And so for that reason, this is why I personally think that this is a lot more interesting than most people give it credit for. So for number 8 we have the carrier attack from Revenge of the Fallen. Now we did get to see something very similar pan out in the final product, which is when the actual carrier gets attacked by a lot of meteors. But within this piece of concept art it appeared to look a little different in that we were going to see a gigantic transformer attacking the carrier, which I think would be pretty cool to see on screen if they were to go with that design, but instead we had something a little more generic. And what does fascinate me about this Decepticon's design is the fact that it just looked like a gigantic octopus of sorts, which does look pretty unique in comparison to most other Decepticons we've seen in the series thus far. But I suppose they wanted one gigantic Decepticon in the name of Devastator and thus scrapping this Decepticon, which is kind of a shame really. Coming in at number 7, we of course have the Flash Dog from Dark of the Moon. Now I can't really remember whether or not this thing made it into the final product as a cameo of sorts, but looking at this design right here, it does appear that the Flash Dog does look more retro in comparison to the other Transformers. And the smile just looks a lot more animated to me as well. Now yeah, we have seen plenty of animal based Transformers out there in the past, but I think this one does look really interesting to me just because of how animated it really looks. And it does look rather amusing in that it does appear to be wearing its own sunglasses as well. Coming in at number 6 we have the original Barricade from The Last Night. Now this is a pretty interesting case because on the surface it doesn't look too different from the final design, at least in terms of its body size, as well as how his body is completely structured. However, when you look at this version of Barricade, you can tell that there are some resemblance to his original design back in the first film, but specifically when it comes down to his black colour palette as well as his face. And when you look at this design for Barricade as well as the final design that they went with, they almost look like two completely different Decepticons. And when I first saw the final design for Barricade in the film, I didn't even know that that was legitimate Barricade. And if it was up to me, I would rather stick with this design instead. So for number 5 we have Electric Soundwave from Dark of the Moon. Now on the surface this doesn't seem too different from the final design that he went with. But what's interesting about this version of Soundwave is the fact that he does have some blue aura around his arms as well as even his torso and face. And because of how there's a bunch of electricity flowing around his body, I honestly think that this could have helped Soundwave stand out alongside the other Decepticons a lot more. Because without it, he just looked like every other Decepticon. And what's also pretty interesting is the fact you can see a cannon on his shoulder, which is pretty reminiscent to his G1 form. And why they removed that from his final design is beyond me, because with them features he does look a lot closer to his original form. So for number 4 we have the Aussie Combiners from Revenge of the Fallen. Now in this film we did get to briefly see Arcee alongside two other Transformers of her kind. And sadly they were pretty much wasted, a lot like majority of the Autobots and Decepticons in this series. Although what I find to be personally cool is the fact that there was a possibility in that both of the Arcee sisters could merge together and become one Transformer. And even though this wouldn't help Arcee too much, at the very least this could have been something memorable worthy of note. Because as cool as they appeared, they did next to nothing in that film, which is quite unfortunate. Coming in at number 3, we have Ultra Magnus from Dark of the Moon. Now yeah, there's no two ways about this in that this is pretty much Sentinel Prime only with gold armour. But the whole idea of having Ultra Magnus in one of these films just excites me because Ultra Magnus is one of the main characters within the franchise. Because as far as my knowledge goes in terms of the Transformers lore, Ultra Magnus is supposed to be one of the most powerful Autobots to ever live. And in many ways he is deemed to be Optimus's equal. Although I suppose that they scrapped the idea of Ultra Magnus in favour of Sentinel Prime just so that they could link him up more with Optimus Prime. And so in that sense I can kinda see where they're going from here, mainly because both of them are primes, while Ultra Magnus simply is not a prime. Either way, I do hope that we will eventually get to see Ultra Magnus on the big screen. So for number 2 we have Arcee from the original Transformers. Now this one to me is very fascinating because originally it was going to be Arcee and not Ironhide. And I suppose the main reason why Arcee was scrapped was because they thought Ironhide would sell more than Arcee in terms of toys. Which is quite unfortunate because Arcee is supposed to be one of the main staples within the Transformers franchise, and this design right here just looks absolutely incredible for Arcee. Sure, it appears that Arcee was going to have some sort of tomboy persona, but at the same time I think that's rather fitting for the character. And if they were to use Arcee for the original film, then it would have had a bit more variety in terms of the Autobots. And finally for number 1 we have Optimus Primal from The Last Knight. Now the whole idea of having Optimus Primal in one of these films is so baffling to me because Optimus Primal originated in a completely different incarnation of the Transformers. And the whole design for Optimus Primal just looks very bizarre, but in a good way. And I can totally imagine this version of Primal going up against someone like Grimlock. And if they were to introduce Optimus Primal into The Last Knight, what would his role even be? And because of how fascinating his possible inclusion really is, this is why I have to give this the number 1 spot. So which piece of concept art from the Transformers film series did you personally find to be the most interesting? Comment below and share some thoughts, and don't forget to check on the poll and vote on which film series you would like me to focus on next. And as always, thank you guys for watching this video, please like and subscribe, take care and have a good one.